Okay, we will begin. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Our wishes this afternoon for a refuah shlema for all those who are ill, and condolences for those that have lost loved ones and friends during this terrible time period. We stand together as a community. This afternoon, we have the privilege of being live from Israel with two of our very esteemed alumna. The Zoom is titled From Nishapur to New York, the Journey of Transformative Jewish Texts. We are proud to have two of our fine alumna who serve as part of the leadership of the National Library of Israel, Naomi Schacter, class of 76, and Raquel Ukeles, class of 88. Naomi Schacter, 76, heads the international relations at the National Library of Israel, and as a member of the senior team, advancing the transformative renewal of the National Library, Naomi works closely with the range of library departments and programs and external partners to advance a wide range of strategies and programs at the library. Prior to her work at the library, Naomi was the Associate Director of Shatil and Initiative of the New Israel Fund. Naomi lives in Jerusalem with her husband and 5 children. Dr. Raquel Ukeles has been the curator of the Islam and Middle East collection of the National Library of Israel since 2010. In addition to managing one of the National Library's core collections, Raquel leads digital, cultural, and educational initiatives based on the library's Arabic and Islamic cultural heritage materials. After graduating from Ramaz, she received her BA from Princeton and then her MA and PhD from Harvard in 2006, all in comparative Islamic and Jewish studies. For the past 20 years, Raquel has taught extensively both in America and in Israel on Islam and Judaism, and, very importantly, on improving Jewish-Muslim relations. She currently lives in Jerusalem with her husband and 3 children. Today's program will begin with a short 5-minute introductory video that will provide an overview of the library's renewal. It will be followed by Naomi giving a brief perspective of the background and history of the National Library of Israel. Following that, Raquel is going to take us on a few journeys of transformative Jewish texts from the library collection. If you have questions or thoughts, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, and we will make every effort to take those thoughts and questions and have Naomi and Raquel answer them in proper order. Once again, thank you for joining us, and enjoy this short film.
For more than 120 years, the National Library in Jerusalem has been dedicated to preserving Jewish and Israeli culture and history, the beating heart of the Jewish people. And in this place, in this very building, are some of the world's most hidden and fascinating treasures.
ספרייה היא בית מדרש, ובית מדרש במציאות הישראלית צריך להכיל את כל הריבוי הזה. האנשים האלה שבאים לספרייה, הם מרגישים שם בבית, כי האוסף מייצג אותם.
What's special about the Islam Middle East collection is that it enables us to understand and learn and to assimilate the ideas of the region that we live in. And it's an opportunity for us to go beyond the Jewish world and to understand the connections between the Jewish and Islamic worlds.
דרכו של הלימוד היהודי, המסורתי, הייתה ברעש, והלימוד בתנועה ורעש מאפיינת את הלימוד היהודי, להבדיל מהתנועה הזאת, הספרנית הזאת של שקט, דממה מוחלטת. אנחנו צריכים למצוא את האיזון בין השניים.
הרבה פעמים שואלים אותי, מהו הפריט שעדיין חסר לך? התשובה האמיתית מבחינתי היא שכל פריט ופריט, והספרייה הלאומית מוסיפה מאות אלפי פריטים בכל שנה ושנה, אני מרגיש שזה איזשהו קיר שאנחנו בונים, נדבך אחר נדבך, בסיפור של העם היהודי ומדינת ישראל.
The National Library is in the midst of a renewal process that aims to transform it into a central player in the cultural lives of the citizens of Israel, of Jews abroad, and people around the world. As part of this process, millions of items are undergoing digital conservation, processing, and scanning, and are then made accessible to the public. From hundreds of thousands of books, maps, and manuscripts, to audio material, exceptional archival items, and rare collections. It is all being revealed and made accessible daily to millions of people worldwide. The new library building will be built in Jerusalem's National Precinct, facing the Knesset building and adjacent to the Israel Museum. Visitors to the new complex will enjoy 6 floors of state-of-the-art reading halls, a modular culture and education area, and a contemporary visitor center.
האתגר הגדול שלנו בבניין החדש זה איך לתכנן בניין שיהיה מתאים למגוון של פעילויות בו זמנית. גם לתת את הסביבה האקדמית הראויה, את השקט הראוי, להכיל מבקרים, ליצור פה פעילות תרבותית ולא לפגוע בסביבה הראויה של החוקרים.
The building reflects the history, and the history is reflected in the building. It's literally carved out like a piece of stone, like a book that you open. The circle is, of course, bringing daylight in. But the circle continues its way down to the sea of books, where the books are stored. So it's like a water pond, like a well. So it's related even to history, to find water.
The concept or the plan for the new library is the country is to open, to welcome, to be transparent, to bring in as much as possible of different kinds of people.
You do a building that make people happy. That is a place that people want to go. They want to be at that new place because it's part of their heart.
I know what it means for Israeli people. I know what it means also to the world. So it's not only a Jewish project. I think from my point of view, it's a project that goes beyond that.
With the opening of the new structure, the rich cultural activity will continue to draw in wide audiences. At the same time, the library will continue to promote research, preservation, and making Jewish and Israeli culture accessible digitally, using the most advanced technological means. This in order to maintain the National Library's status as the leading institution in Israel and abroad for collecting and preserving the treasures of the Jewish people from Israel and from the diaspora.
Okay, so I think this is my cue, and I hope that you can all see me. And I will be putting on a presentation, but first I wanted to say hello, and it feels very special to be doing this library presentation here in the context of the Ramaz online platform that, you know, Kenny, you mentioned the Ramaz community. And, you know, in these very challenging, strange, weird times that we're all living through, there is, you know, sort of from crisis to opportunity. It's very meaningful what you have put together here in terms of this platform that brings an ongoing series of lectures and talks. Of course, you have a lot of wonderful Ramaz alumni who are doing great things throughout in many professions and throughout the world. So a good group to draw from, and thanks for including us in that group. Raquel and I live in Israel, and we have not been hit quite as hard with COVID-19 there as you have certainly in New York and in the United States. But given our roots and given that we are part of this global community, we really are thinking of you during this time, both in terms of the pandemic, but of course also with what's going on in the United States right now following the killing of George Floyd. I have to say I felt very proud when I saw the beautiful letter that the head of school, Jonathan Cannon, sent around following the killing of George Floyd in the beginning of the protests. I thought it was really eloquent and moving and an important message. About COVID, I should just mention that, the library, we collect everything. All the people, the crazy people who hold on to everything, we love them because they give their stuff to us. And, we all know those people, but it's amazing the story that things can tell later on. So within the category of things that we collect are ephemera, from the word ephemeral, those things that are meant to be thrown away. Flyers and greeting cards and posters and wedding invitations. And yes, we are leading a worldwide collection of Jewish COVID ephemera. So keep it in mind if you have materials, physical and digital, that you would like to send our way, we welcome that. I'm going to be turning on the presentation now, but as I'm doing it, I would like to ask for a show of hands that I can't see, but if I could see you, I would ask if you've been to the National Library of Israel. And I would even ask a more basic question, if you knew that Israel has a national library. And don't feel bad if you haven't been there and if you didn't know. As my brother Steve Schacter likes to say, when he first came and visited, because of course when my family came to Israel, I worked at the library, so they came to visit. And he said, this is Israel's best kept secret. So you are now going to be part of the growing group that are learning more about the National Library. And I'm going to walk you through briefly some history and then hand it over to my colleague Raquel to really, so you can get to see some of the very exciting items in our collection. Just a few, but of the many millions, I should say. So briefly, the National Library of Israel, we actually trace our origins all the way back to 1892. And a group of mainly Eastern European Jews got together and sent over 20,000 books to get started, maybe even more. One guy, Chazanovich, actually the video you saw started with a quote from him. He's one of the kind of legendary figures in the chronicles of the library. He sent over 20,000 alone, together with many others, and they started a small library. Their idea was to open the first public Jewish library in Jerusalem. Then fast forward to 1925, we became part of the Hebrew University. As they were being established, they said, will you be our library? We were located on Mount Scopus at the time, and from 1930, we were known as the Jewish National and University Library. And that's what we were known as until 2007. And in 2007, the National Library of Israel law was passed. We moved into our current building in 1960 on the Givat Ram campus. I'm not going to walk you through it all, but suffice to say that 1948, Mount Scopus became a no man's land. The library and all of Hebrew University had to pack up and go elsewhere. Here you can see some of the wonderful pictures. We have many thousands, in fact, we have many millions of photographs, but I love some of these old photographs showing this is the moving of the books in that period after 48 when we were moving from Mount Scopus, actually to Terra Sancta in the center of town. Here you can just see the National Library of Israel law from 2007, and that is when the renewal began, what we call the renewal. What does it mean? It's this shift. We were long considered Israel's leading humanities library for scholars and researchers. But the renewal meant that we were making this shift from not only being an academic research library, but an open public cultural institution. And I'm just going to try and convey a little bit of the flavor of what that renewal means. So it means culture. Here you can see, and our cultural events all connect to the items in our collection. So on the left, you can see the wonderful, if you know, the Yemenite, it's a group called Awa, and they are 3 sisters, and they perform Yemenite music, and they're very, very cool. At the center, Docutext is one of our flagship summer festivals. The jury is still out on whether we will hold it live this year or whether we will have a virtual digital Docutext. Here, this is an incredible program. It's a Piyut festival that takes place between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a 3-day festival. And you have to really fully understand the very sort of Germanic origins, scholarly origins of the library to fully appreciate what it is with the all-nighter during Besod Kolot Rabim, where you have people doing a range of prayer, liturgy, music at 2 a.m., jamming in the hallways of the National Library of Israel. It's extremely cool. I want to point this out because I think this is a children's cultural event, nighttime theater, where they have to search for things. It's really incredible. It was sold out. We did it last summer. There was such a demand. We did it again on Hanukkah. And I just have to share an anecdote that the culture department said, you know, we got this wonderful note from a professor from the United States who said he brought his kids there and it was the best children's activity he's ever done anywhere, anytime. I said, wow, how nice. I'd love to see this note. And sure enough, the note was from yet another Ramaz alum, Jonathan Gribbets. Jonathan and his wife Sarit spend their summers in Israel, and he hangs out at the National Library and brought them to this event. So Jonathan, if you're out there, thanks for that note. Everyone likes good feedback. This is the latest. This is the reading room. Similar on some level to what we're doing here. We have live cultural events at the library. We couldn't do it during the Corona period, and we did a very quick turnaround and now hold our cultural events, broad range, literary, academic performances in what we call the reading room. And I welcome you to explore it. And a little tip, in a few weeks' time, we will be launching the International Reading Room with yet more events in English and other languages. Right now, frankly, most things are in Hebrew, although you went to Ramaz, so you would understand everything because your Hebrew is wonderful. But really, it's worth exploring the reading room. It's very cool. Education. We're doing education. 10 years ago, there were no kids at the library. There was a sign that said children under 16 cannot come in. It was a really, they wanted silence. This is the Beit HaMikdash, a sacred space for the scholars. Now, not during these last months, but generally, hordes of kids come through from schools throughout the country, and we also have a lot of online events, and we're actually talking to Ramaz about something that we may do together around these online events. I should point out in the picture on the right that we make a special effort to outreach to the Arab community, to Arab students, and we have thousands of students coming through from East Jerusalem, and that's not obvious. It's not obvious. We take a lot of pride. It's important to us that the National Library of Israel is for all of Israel's communities and will be a shared space where everybody feels welcome. Exhibitions. We have exhibitions at the library, and we'll have a lot more in the new building where there will be dedicated exhibition space as well as temporary rotating exhibits. On the left, you can see, I'll just mention that this was actually for a Jerusalem exhibition, but it's a very well-known image, the cloverleaf bunting map. We have the original, it's from 1581. We have the largest collection of ancient maps of the Holy Land in the world. We had a Maimonides exhibit that we did together with the Israel Museum. On the right, we had an Allenby and Balfour exhibit. Right now, there's a giant whale in the middle of our lobby, and that in itself is a great story. If we had more time, I would tell you all about the whale, which was created by a wonderful artist called Hadassah Goldville. So we mentioned culture, we mentioned education, digitization, of course. We are doing massive digitization. We want everything in the library. We can't digitize everything, but we are digitizing literally millions of things. We want it all to be accessible. It's available from in your home. You can access it. And we believe in the democratization of education and the accessibility as much as is possible of our materials. This is an audio app that we did with the Ministry of Culture, and I recommend that you explore Shiri. You can download it. It's in the Google Play Store, and it's endless Israeli music, free. And you can curate, it's wonderful. It's been a very big hit. We have conferences, local and international. On the right, you can see Shimon Peres, who was the honorary chair of our global forum, which is one of our international global conferences that we hold every 2 years. We are around the world in many ways. On the left, that is a program called At the Source. It's Italy. We're doing capacity building to archivists in Italy, working with them on how best to digitize and catalog their collections. In the center, this was an event at the Israeli ambassador's home in Berlin. It was the public return of Kafka materials. But I'm not even going to go down the Kafka rabbit hole. It's an amazing story, and Raquel we'll talk about it a little bit later. On the right, we actually have an image of from the Global Forum. You may be able to recognize some of the celebrities that were there, including Jamaica Kincaid. Treasures. Our treasures are, Raquel and I often say that part of the really fun aspect of our work is that we get to pull out these treasures and look at them live and show them to people, and it is emotional each time. So on the left, part of our map collection, this is actually a copy of a map created by the Vilna Gaon. On the right, one of our over 7,000 manuscripts handwritten by Sir Isaac Newton. Great story how we got these Newton manuscripts, but we'll have to wait for another time. On the left here, you can see Maimonides' Mishna Torah, a 14th century Spanish illuminated Mishna Torah. It's truly gorgeous. It was actually on loan at the Israel Museum during the Maimonides exhibition. Here you can see a late 18th century on the right, Ottoman literary manuscript. We have the largest collection of ketubot in the world, so they say. There's one on the left. On the right is a Megillat Esther. We have the largest collection of Israeli and Jewish music in the world, both in our sound library and also in sheet music. Here you can see a piece, sheet music from Argov. Archives. Our archives are quite wonderful. I mentioned music. We have Naomi Schacter in our archives. We have Martin Buber. We have Kafka now. We have Natan Sharansky. We have David Grossman. Living Israeli authors give us their archives. We have Alice Shalvey. On the right, you can see a handwritten Hatikva. It's not exactly the words you know today, but it's written by Naftali Hertz Imber, who composed Hatikva. He wrote the words for Hatikva. Also a great story, another time. We'll give you all the backstories. They're often as interesting, sometimes even more so than the items themselves. So what are we doing with these belly dancers? These Lynn and Liz Jamal were international sensation belly dancers. They grew up in Egypt. There are video movies of them. They traveled throughout the world. Well, Lynn and Liz Jamal meet Helena and Bertha Fischel. Yeah, their father was from Vienna. They moved to Egypt. Ultimately, they didn't feel safe there and left when many of the Jews left and moved to New York. And then Kafka, I mentioned, just to whet your appetite a little bit, you can see he wrote in Hebrew. And yeah, that's a Kafka illustration. He did really spacey stuff. And now I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Raquel. I will join you again at the end after Raquel speaks for a little bit of a tour of the new building that's under construction and will be ready in about 1.5 years. Raquel.
Thank you, Naomi. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. I want to echo Naomi's thanks to Ramaz, to Kenny and Leah. It's really wonderful to be back. And it's wonderful to be with all of you and to share the magic of touching Jewish history. Now, if we were together, as Naomi hinted at, I would love to show you these items in person. But the truth is that the people who run the rare manuscript vault, they're a little scary. They're pretty strict, and I'm not sure we would be able to take out all the items I'm about to show you. So sometimes seeing the digital image can be even better, and it also allows us to get very, very close to these key Jewish texts. 4 texts, 4 journeys. The journey is both about how these canonical Jewish texts have moved through time and space, and they also are the stories of these manuscripts. Each manuscript is unique, and sometimes, as Naomi alluded to, the story of a unique manuscript is better than the story of the text itself. You can let us know at the end. So let's get started. Okay, our first journey will look at Mishna study in surprising places. And we start off in the Galil in the late 2nd century CE in Beit Sha'arim, the seat of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the Rabbi Judah the Prince, and where he did a lot of the work of editing the Mishnah. And of course, as you all know, the Mishnah being the first redaction of the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral law. Here he worked throughout his life to complete the Mishnah. Now, the history I learned growing up was that once Rabbi Yehuda Nasi completed the Mishnah, it became the basis of scholarly discussions that led to the formation of first the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Talmud of the land of Israel, also called the Palestinian Talmud, in about 400 CE, and then later the more famous Babylonian Talmud, which was put together over a long period of time, roughly around 500 CE. But it turns out that texts, as we are going to see again and again, are more dynamic than the hard books that we think of today. And not only did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi work on the text throughout his life, but following his lifetime, different versions, different recensions developed and evolved in different places. The key ones were the Mishnah version that was developed and studied in the land of Israel. And this text continued as a separate Mishnah text. And the second recension version was connected to the Babylonian study, the Academy, and that text of the Mishnah does not survive as an independent text, but as the basis for the Gemara in the Babylonian Talmud. By the 10th century, Jewish communities had spread well beyond these two locations, the land of Israel and Bavel. And so here we are traveling from the land of Israel to Nishapur. Now, Nishapur during the medieval period was a great center of intellectual, religious, and cultural meeting places. It was a very important Islamic center. We're looking at one of our beautiful Islamic manuscripts from the National Library. And this was a text called Hadith, compiled by Muslim ibn Hajjaj, who was from Nishapur. And his codification work in the 9th century mirrors very much the process of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and for the Mishnah, this was the Islamic oral Torah equivalent that becomes the basis for Islamic law. So while we go past Nishapur and this place, which was an Islamic center, and we know from the travel writer Binyamin of Tudela that Jews lived in Nishapur, traders and scholars, and we arrive at Bamyan. Now, perhaps you remember the name Bamyan. Unfortunately, that was the site in 2001 where the Taliban destroyed 6th century Buddhist statues. It turns out that Bamyan and the whole Khorasan region was a home to a thriving multi-religious and multicultural society that included Jewish scholars and traders who were all working along the Silk Route that connected China and Mongolia with the Middle East and Europe. In 2013, and then again in 2016, the National Library had the opportunity to purchase a total of 300 documents, thanks to the generosity of National Library friends and supporters. As my colleague Yoel, who's the Judaica curator at the library, wrote, "Rarely does a single cache of texts radically change our knowledge of a region and culture. These recently discovered pages from today's Afghanistan, dating from the 11th to the 13th century, do just that." The sudden appearance in the early 21st century of material to document Jewish life in this area and also Muslim life is a shockingly rare occurrence and offers a window to us of a community that we knew almost nothing about. Now, the texts in this collection are written in 6 different languages or linguistic variants: Persian, Judeo-Persian, which is Persian in Hebrew letters; Arabic, Judeo-Arabic, which is Arabic in Hebrew letters; Hebrew, and Aramaic. These languages suggest diverse religious and cultural subgroups living near each other, conducting business with each other. Among the Jewish documents, we see the gamut of religious texts, liturgical texts, commercial, legal, and even personal letters. This collection is known as the Afghan Geniza, which is funny because it predates Afghanistan by many hundreds of years, and it's not a Geniza. It's actually an archive primarily of a Jewish family who lived in the city of Bamyan in the first half of the 11th century. What is this text? We are looking at a sheet divided into 4 pages, and we are looking at text from the Mishnah. This is the end of Masechet Eduyot and the beginning of Masechet Tractate Avoda Zara. Now, earlier I mentioned that there were 2 different versions of the Mishnah, one influenced by the Bavli, the Talmud Bavli, and the other influenced by the traditions of the land of Israel. As Professor Matthew Morgenstern explains, this kind of community in the 11th century by now was having access to both kinds of traditions. And how would they deal with contradictory versions, words or sections that were different? What scholars would do was they would try to blend or harmonize these versions according to their understanding of the work. Now, these 4 pages, again, just 4 pages, actually opens up for us a window into how Jews experienced and interacted with the Mishnah, because what we find here is a combination of passages from the Babylonian Mishnah and passages from the land of Israel Mishnah, and attempts to bring them all together. Here's the second page. And if we get close up, I want to show you a few things. What we're looking at in the circles are a few different ways that the Jewish scholar who is writing this text is interacting with the text. If you see the blue circle, we actually have one version that he crossed out, and he wrote a different version. And the different version that he wrote, which is being unfortunately blocked by the circle, I wrote here in the text underneath, and that is the Cheres Wani, which is much closer to the Mishnah that we have, which is a Daryani, a kind of clay. And so we see an example of how this scholar was comparing different versions and making corrections. In the green circle, we have an example of a Judeo-Persian gloss and interpretation of a difficult word. The Mishnah says, Elu dvarim shel legoyim asurim v'isurim isur hana'ah. These are items that are of non-Jews, Gentiles, that are forbidden for us to enjoy them, make use of them. And so what's written on top of the word hana'ah is a Judeo-Persian word, menfa'iyet, which means things you enjoy. And then on the red circle, we see something that's just funky, and that is, it's what's called nikud bavli, which was a different set of signs for the vowels that we know today. And so that line with the dot on top is actually a chirik, and so the word here is mistaprim. This form of writing the vowels was popular from the Gaonic period and continued with Persian Jews. And we have documents in the Cairo Geniza that actually use this vowelization system, which I frankly had never heard of until I saw this material. So what do we have here? These just 4 pages of the Mishnah from a corner of the Jewish world shed light on the history of the Mishnah. That is, the Mishnah was a relatively stable text, but it turns out it wasn't a completely stable text. And Jewish scholars would feel very comfortable and actively engage with the text and try to blend the traditions they have and to try to come up with one coherent document of the way they understood the Mishnah. They did not see that as a problem. They saw the text as much more fluid. And it's very interesting to know that these Jewish scholars sitting in 11th century Bamyan in modern day Afghanistan weren't passive consumers of this canonical Jewish text, but they saw themselves as active and capable to intervene with the text. It's a very different way of thinking about the Mishnah that we experience it today. All that from 4 pages. Now, when we talk about this Mishnah text, one of the reasons why these 4 pages have been so surprising for scholars is that this Mishnah text that blends these different traditions predates the Rambam. The Rambam, of course, Rav Moshe ben Maimon, who died in 1204, was a central figure in creating a blended version of the Mishnah, drawing both from the Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and the Babylonian texts. The Rambam was the first to produce a systematic commentary on the Mishnah in Judeo-Arabic. Remember, that's Arabic with Hebrew letters. That's the language that Jews wrote in for many hundreds of years. And there he produced a standard Mishnah text in order to write his commentary. And in the commentary, he incorporated a lot of Talmudic discussions in order to make sense of the Mishnah. And then that text, the Judeo-Arabic text, was actually translated into Hebrew, and the Hebrew version of the Mishnah becomes the basis for almost all Mishnah printings afterwards. So you can imagine how important this text is, that the Rambam is understood by many authorities to have created the first comprehensive blended Mishnah text, the one intelligible traditions pulling together all of these different lines. Now, the National Library has the remarkable fortune and honor to house part of the Rambam's own, what's called autographed copy of his commentary. So let's go on our second journey. The Rambam writes in his introduction to the commentary that he began the work at the age of 23 in Fez and completed it, and here we are walking, takes a long time when you walk, completed it in Fustat in Old Cairo. Now, to be fair, the Rambam actually took a boat but we're on foot. He completed it 7 years later because of all these travels at the age of 30. When you open the work, and here is it, we're looking at a page of the Rambam's own copy of his Perush HaMishnah from Tractate Yevamot in the Seder Nashim, the one of 6 orders of this one on women and family issues. We can see, right, Maimonides, the Rambam's own internal deliberations and decisions that are expressed in the text. And so if you can look on the right side, you will see, and here's a blow up of it, you will see the Rambam crossing out a section, and here he's talking about different kinds of marriages and those that are problematic and require compensation. Throughout his life, he actually kept working. Now, if you remember that phrase, I said that about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi kept working on the Mishnah throughout his lifetime. So too the Rambam, who often saw himself in parallel to that role, he was working on the commentary to the Mishnah throughout his lifetime. And if we go back to this earlier page, you see on the left-hand side that Rav Avraham, his son, and his grandson David Hanagid continued to write glosses on the text, apparently taking oral teachings of his father and grandfather to make sure to explain or to amend this text. Now we're on this journey, right? And it turns out that this text was part of the great family heirloom for many, many, many generations. The family continued in Cairo to lead the community until the 15th century. And then they moved to Aleppo. And they took the manuscript with them, of course. Here I'm benefiting from the writing of another colleague, Daniel Lipson, who explains that we even have an attestation from Rav Yosef Cairo's Avkata Rochel in the 16th century that he saw the copy in 16th century Aleppo. Now, at some point, Maimonides' family split apart. And it's likely that everyone wanted a piece of this family heirloom. And so it was decided to break up the manuscript into 6 sections according to the 6 orders, the Sterim. And now the story of these 6 orders split. 3 ended up being purchased by English priests in Aleppo in the 17th century, and they ended up in Oxford's Bodleian Library, and that is Zraim, Nizikim, and Kodashim. And 2 tractates, Nashim and Moed, were purchased in Damascus in 1908 by the Toledano brothers. And then they bought it from, they say, a simple local Jew. And they sold it to David Solomon Sassoon, who was the great bibliophile, original of Baghdad background, who was born in India and ended up living in London. And so here, this manuscript has moved from Fez to Cairo to Aleppo to Damascus, and then to London. Sassoon's descendants at some point needed funds, and so they decided to put 8 manuscripts from the collection on auction at Sotheby's. The National Library, of course, had a great interest in this material, but could not afford it. The price was too high. So the Israeli Minister of Education at that time, Aaron Gadlin, called on volunteer groups, philanthropists, and Jewish representatives from abroad and the general public to all do a kind of crowdfunding to purchase these manuscripts. And that is what happened. 8 manuscripts were purchased in 1975, including these handwritten autographed copies of the Rambam's Perush HaMishnah, the commentary on the Mishnah, and they were transferred to the National Library for safekeeping and enables us to show them to you today. So what have we learned from our second journey? The Rambam's own deliberations and editorial hand brings this text alive. We move from, if we had an original conception of a text as a closed static text between 2 covers, we're slowly beginning to understand how in pre-modern times that was not at all a text. The text was a much more dynamic, fluid item that was continually being improved. And of course, this greater story of what happens to these texts mirrors and echoes the travels of Jews and Jewish scholars throughout the Middle East into Europe and eventually into Israel today. Now, sometimes a text you might think is transformative, but it is not. And so the third item I want to show to you is a Sidur that had a revolutionary insertion, but it did not become common. But it is interesting material for us today. So we're going back to the land of Israel, and we are focusing now on the community in Rome. And as you might know, the early community of Rome, called the Bnei Roma, they see themselves as holding on to very ancient traditions, minhagim, customs of the land of Israel. And these are people who connect to people who left the land of Israel before the time of the Talmuds. And so they see themselves as holding on to these very ancient, old, pre-Talmudic minhagim. And so the Siddur of Bnei Roma is sometimes seen as a bridge between different traditions, between Ashkenazi and Sephardi traditions. So this is the story of a Siddur that was produced in Mantua, Italy, according to the minhag of the Jews of Rome. Now, I will say that this is a gorgeous manuscript that's very, very delicate. It's so delicate that it has yet to be scanned, as Naomi was describing the digitization efforts today. And so I actually took my own cell phone and took these pictures in order to show this Siddur to you. We're looking at the first page of a beautifully embellished and illuminated manuscript. And the first page talks about the 100 brachot. What is the Siddur? This Siddur is very special for a number of reasons. It was, the scribe of the Siddur was a very famous 15th century scholar who in an early phase of his life was a scribe, and that is Rav Avram Farisol. Rav Farisol was born in Avignon and moved to Mantua in order to work under as an intern and a scribe, and he produced a number of beautiful Jewish texts. Among them, he produced two Siddurim, one in 1471 and one in 1480, for young women. Now, why young women? We have to know a little bit about Rav Farisol. Rav Farisol turned out to become a great scholar and a Renaissance man. He was very interested in all sorts of new developments. One might even say new trends. He was very aware of all the travel to what they then called the New World, into the Americas and into India. And he probably understood what would be a proper gift for a wealthy young woman. Now, here's an example from our collection, from our Humanities collection, of what's called a Book of Hours. And this is a kind of prayer book according to the Catholic calendar of saints that was considered to be a very appropriate wedding gift for a wealthy young woman. Okay, so if he knew about trends, then he would propose to create a beautiful Siddur for a young woman of one of his patrons. And sometimes it was considered to be a way to keep young women out of trouble, so that they would be, reciting brachot, these 100 blessings, and not doing other things. Well, what's special about this, this Siddur? So we're looking at the Brachot HaShachar, the first blessings that we say at the beginning of the day, and I will now zoom in to what is revolutionary and remarkable, and that is, if you recall the traditional blessing that you say in the beginning, so a man would say, "Blessed are you, God, ruler of the universe, for creating me a man and not a woman," and a woman says, "Blessed are you, God, for making me as you decided to, or you willed." But here we have something that seems like proto-feminist. It says here, "Blessed are you, God, for making me a woman and not a man," which is perfectly egalitarian and even. Now, what we don't know is, did Rav Farisol draw from an ancient custom of the community of Rome, or was he an innovator? He wanted to make his customers happy, and he knew that things were changing in the world. The truth is, we don't know. We know there are two versions, as I mentioned. This one from 1480 sits at the National Library, and the 1471 version sits in JTS. But we do know that this journey helps us understand, again, we're going back to these ancient traditions of the land of Israel and Babylonia, and how they move into Europe and are preserved sometimes in these great Jewish texts. And sometimes it seems like people are innovating. Is this an ancient tradition? Is it a modern innovation? We don't know. what is clear is this bracha does not become the common way that Jewish women would say the brachot at the beginning of the day, but given that it is preserved at the library, it now becomes raw material, and we can reclaim this moment and bring it into a more relevant time. Now, with my last few minutes, I want to jump into the modern period, and Naomi alluded to Kafka material that we again are very honored to have at the National Library, and to go with you on our final Kafkaesque journey. So Kafka, who is considered to be one of the 10 leading authors of all time of modern literature, was someone who we almost didn't know anything about. Kafka died very early, as you probably know, from tuberculosis on June 3rd, 1924, at the age of 39. And he asked his dear friend Max Brod to gather up all his materials without reading them and destroy them, to burn them. Now, Brod always wondered why he would do that, because Brod always made it clear that he would never destroy Kafka's material. Brod was a great believer, one of the best friends Kafka could have had. After Kafka died, Brod started to collect all the archive material, which was in different places, his girlfriend, his parents, and other places. But he decides not to burn the material. In fact, he explicitly decides to start publishing the material. In the first set of publications he does is to take 3 major novels, The Trial, America, and The Castle, which none of them were finished. Brod made a few changes and prepared these works to be published, which he did in 1925 to 1927. Now, in the afterword to The Trial, Brod explains why he defied his own friend's wishes. And he explains that Kafka, if he really wanted to destroy the material, he could have done it himself. But instead he asked Brod, even though he knew Brod wouldn't do it. And so Brod understood the ruach, the spirit of the Kafka's wishes, to be the opposite of what he said. There are many, many stages of this saga. I'll explain that in the 30s, Brod decides that he wants to protect this material, and he comes to an agreement with Kafka's mother and Salman Shokin, the founder of Shokin Books, who had moved to Palestine, to enable Shokin to buy the copyrights and to start publishing all the other material. In 1939, Brod had to leave Czechoslovakia because of the onset of the Nazi regime. He emigrates also to Palestine, to Tel Aviv, and he took the papers with him to his apartment in Tel Aviv. In 1941, with the Italian air raids in the middle of World War II, Brod gets worried about these papers, and he agrees to deposit them in Shokin's own vault at the basement of his building in Jerusalem. But Brod continued to worry about the material. In 1956, he decides to move the material to vaults in Zurich. Now, Brod dies in 1968. There's a whole story about Brod's secretary, who was made executor, who decided she actually became the owner of this archive. And there were many stages of court cases and various sales that I'm going to skip over because of our time. But I will say that after a 3-level trial between Eva Hoffa, her family, her daughters, and the National Library, in which the Hoffa family claimed that they were the personal owners of this archive, and the library claimed that Brod had explicitly asked that this material be brought to a public institution, starting with the Jewish National and University Library, that the Israeli Supreme Court upheld the decision of others that it belongs to the National Library, and so this material slowly began to move towards the library. Now, why Zurich to Jerusalem? Because just last year, the materials from the Zurich vault were opened, and it was a very, very moving moment. The library personnel believed that that would never happen. And I want to show you some of the material that was in that vault. We're looking at Kafka's letter to his father, which you might have read, and this is a letter he wrote following the dissolution of his engagement to Felice Bauer, and his father's active disapproval, he felt, contributed to the toxic atmosphere. And it's a letter explaining why father and son don't get along, why they're both just pointing to each other. But of course, it's 46 pages. Now, there were 2 copies made. There was a handwritten copy, and then he decides to sit down and type it. With the last few pages, as we see, were handwritten and Broad published this material in 1952. Broad actually waited until Kafka's parents had died, because the story is that Kafka showed this material to his mother before he gave it to his father, and the mother said, "Nuh-uh, no way is this going to be brought to your father." So it was published, but it's very moving to see, again, going back to our theme here about how texts are made, that Kafka continued to work with it. And so you see the crossing out, and you see the adding of the handwritten material at the end. As Naomi mentioned, we saw in this vault, when it was opened up last year, that Kafka had many, many different talents. And I'm just going to quickly show you a few of the drawings that we saw there. Some of this might be self-portraits. The one at the bottom left seems to be his mother. And also Hebrew exercises. He started studying Hebrew in 1917. He was very serious about it and got to an advanced level. We're looking at what we believe is a summary of a Hebrew newspaper that he read with his tutor from 1920, and then a very touching letter on the left to his tutor about, please don't be disappointed in me. I'm disappointed enough for both of us, but at least you'll have work to do until we, correcting my bad Hebrew, until we see each other again. So this journey hopefully showed us what the whimsical side or the luck side of preserving Jewish history. It could have not happened. The Kafka materials could have been destroyed. And it was thanks to the decision of someone along the way to not destroy them, but to publish them. And I think this luck and perseverance is a metaphor for many Jewish texts that we have. So if we conclude our 4 journeys, hopefully you've seen the way that these manuscripts can show us, these manuscripts can show us the dynamism of Jewish texts, how these Jewish texts can preserve earlier phases of Jewish history, yet introduce changes, that the manuscripts really open up for us different moments in Jewish history and how texts can be made and remade. And then you can come to understand why we love manuscripts and how each one captures a unique story and a diverse part of the Jewish experience. Thank you very much. I now want to turn this back. Oh, I'm going to back to sharing. I want to turn this back to Naomi, who's going to just give us a little bit of a glimpse into where the National Library is going next.
So in the video, you saw some images of the new building and some words from the architects Herzog and Zimmermann. Here you can see an image of the new building, and on the right is the Knesset, and it was actually designed very purposefully where not to be too high so as not to block the Knesset. It's 6 stories underground and 5 stories above ground. It's actually on a hill, so sometimes it's more below ground, more below ground. No 2 floors are exactly the same, which makes it very complicated. Can you do the next one, Raquel? This is just some images from the construction site, and we're more advanced than that now. We're well above ground, and here, just hold it a second, Raquel. This is actually the front entrance of the library, and many of the things that you can see, I don't know if you look on the right, you can see kind of the hole punched windows, like these strange shaped windows. You can actually see that happening already when you go to the construction site. And I should say that I don't know exactly if it was analogous in New York, but even throughout the Corona period, the construction industry did not stop. And so there are some delays due to suppliers that we couldn't get their materials from Europe, various people who couldn't get to the site. but essentially we're on schedule. And as I said, the building is scheduled to be completed at the end of 21, early 22, and we will move probably mid 22 into the building. So let's go on. Is there an issue? I just clicked to here. You know, just keep going. We're just looking. This is a cultural auditorium. We're going to have cultural events. The cultural here, hold it a minute here, Raquel. The outdoor, there's an incredible, the building is actually only on 40% of the footprint of the land. The government, the state gave us the land. And it's going to be a two-way auditorium. So you're going to be able to have events outside looking in and inside looking out. There will be gardens and art and sculpture in the outdoor area, a small amphitheater. Next. Here's the exhibition space. You can just keep going, Raquel, so that and this more exhibition space, the temporary exhibition space, the visitor center, which will look different in different ways. There will be, oh, this is the education center, sorry. Next. You just keep going. The reading room, I do want to stop for a moment. You can go to these. It's really incredible, the reading rooms. There are 3 levels of reading rooms, and I think you can get the feel of how dramatic it will be. And it's all, a lot of thought is going into the acoustics. Right now, in our current building on the Givat Ram campus of Hebrew University, we really do have a multitasking problem when we have cultural events, and we don't want to disturb the readers in the reading rooms. So at the center of the library are the readers and the books, and then around it is where the various activities will happen, the education center, the exhibitions, the auditorium, etc. So always from outside, you're looking in at what is the center with these reading rooms. Next. Just keep going. Here we have the rare books and manuscripts room. You could just go back for a minute, Raquel, to the rare books room. We acquired in 2017 the Val Madonna. Some of you may know about it. It was the largest private collection of Jack Lunzer, of rare Jewish books, mainly books and not manuscripts, mainly post end of the 15th century when there was already printing. Anyway, some of you may have seen it when it was exhibited at Sotheby's, but it's very dramatic, and we actually redesigned the rare books room after acquiring the Val Madonna, and it will be lined by the Val Madonna books, which are very beautiful. Jack Lunzer put a lot of effort into the bindings of his books. Next. Here you can see another space that allows you to look at the robotic system, the automatic retrieval of the books, more images of the new building. The Rupin Boulevard entrance, there are 2 entrances, one on Kaplan and one on Rupin. I think this is the last one. Here's just an illustration of what it will look like, and that's it. So thank you, and if you have, I'm passing it over to you, Kenny.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you, Naomi, and thank you, Raquel. We have lots of thank yous which are being given. If anyone does have a question or a thought that they'd like to share, the Q&A is open. There were a couple of people that just asked how to get in contact with both of you. I did share, as I had asked permission to, your emails at the National Library, so you might have some of our Ramaz alumni getting in touch with you. Hopefully we'll be able to travel soon enough to Israel to actually be able to visit and see up close this fascinating the collections that Raquel went through, and Naomi. We will look forward to all having a special tour, which maybe we'll have one of our Ramaz reunions in Israel when the new library opens. In the interim, we do have I just got it's wonderful. This has been wonderful. No questions that have come in, so I think we will leave it at that, but I do want to again thank you and tell our American, Israeli, and worldwide alumni that we continue to have these kinds of programs available to you. You are welcome to share ideas or thoughts or your own talents with us, and we will, of course, incorporate them into the university that we have created. There are opportunities to actually sponsor these Zooms, and if you're interested in doing that, please be in touch with us as well. The next one will be this coming Wednesday, New York time at 12:30, where we will have a roundtable for residential real estate in New York. For those that are interested in what's happening within the real estate markets, we have a fascinating group of alumni, of current parents and alumni parents who will be speaking about the state of the markets. So please join us if you'd like to at 12:30 New York time. Bring your lunch with you for that. There will also be some very fascinating other Zooms that will be announced in emails that will be sent out shortly. We wish everybody an amazing continuation to your day, an amazing night to those in Israel or abroad, and we look forward to seeing you again on Zoom very, very soon. Take care, stay well and healthy.
Thanks again, Leah and Kenny. Really, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.